Is it just me, or is Victoria 3 really pulling itself together these days? And the 1.5 update just got a whole lot juicier. So sit back and relax. With some 1.5 gameplay in the background, let's take a look at the changes to military and more. And we'll start with these interest group traits. Many interest groups across various countries are now customized to have traits with different mechanical effects. Some of them subtle, some quite significant. And as you can see, they vary not just by interest group, here the PBs, but also by place, here looking at France. And as one other final example, you can see a completely different bonus in Sweden given to their PBs. And this is just one small change to an area outside of military. About half of the changes are all military ones, and of course we'll touch on those, but I'm going to save them for the latter half of the video, and instead in this first half focus on some of the broader changes. The next one we'll be looking at is companies, with over, get this, 100 new historic companies added to Victoria 3, many of them with unique unlock conditions. They say they're also working to improve UIs around companies, as well as other improvements. And here you can see the expanded text, and of course the patch notes will be linked below if you want to really jump into the detail. We will touch a little bit more on companies just now. Here's a couple of screenshots, some examples of what the new UI will look like. They say that there's a number of behaviors they'd like to work on over the long term, but they won't quite be able to implement them in 1.5. But they've slated some of the free update accompanying the Sphere of Influence DLC coming in 2024. Let's not get too ahead of ourselves though. Firstly, I'd like to talk about something else that's changed quite a bit in Victoria 3 lately. The Naval Invasions, which of course have had their UI updated, now a little bit easier to use, although maybe not necessarily accurate, as you'll see by this footage. There are definitely some issues in this beta build. Naval Invasions will work a bit differently after Update 1 to Update 1.5. We'll talk the full details at the end around timeframes, but basically, you'll plan the naval invasion, select the territory to invade, select the formations you want to be involved, and confirm. Both the fleet and the army will now travel towards the sea node offshore, and a pin will be used to indicate the naval invasion in the military lens. Once both of those formations have arrived, the battle will commence. Garrisoned armies will defend the state, and of course the landing armies will try and capture it in order to occupy it according to the rules of the game, and once the whole thing is done, the front will be assigned to the army. And you'll see that playing out a little bit in the background gameplay as I jump between nations. Another important change is the imposition of laws on our subjects, a feature initially intended again for that Sphere of Influence expansion, but they've decided to put it in the open beta. We can now force our subjects to start enacting certain laws through their country panel and then the politics tab. We can find that their current laws are enabled for us as buttons, and we can click them and select which one. We'll take a look at the UI in a minute. It's important to note though that this is sort of very high level in the alpha, and there's more that they'd like to do around adding more options, improving the user interface, adding some distinctions between which subject types you'd like to enforce the laws onto, and some sort of overlord boost as well. And here you can see a little shot captioned "Free Farmers in my personal union. This is a call to action," with the imposition of homesteading over tenant farmers suggested. Moving through to another quick-fire change in today's relatively quick update. We've got a lot to cover, and we're going to cover our ground efficiently. Now we're talking population growth, one issue that they see frequently in the mid to late game, especially around highly effective player countries, mass unemployment, and overpopulation. And I'm sure that you've encountered this as well. This is a very common problem, at least in my personal experience. Some of the changes they've made in the back end include generational shift from loyalists and radicals, who will now decay faster, and literacy will adjust towards education access faster too. Also, no more annoying, immersion-damaging local minimum mortality at standard of living level 20. Both the birth rate and mortality rate now drops as expected. And there are plenty more changes. They go into quite a bit of detail. I will, of course, as I say, link the patch notes below, but here you have seen on this graph how the population growth will differ now compared to the old numbers. Overall, looking, hopefully, quite a bit better. Changes to civilian life don't stop there though. Building employment, or how we hire people, has changed as well. Moving forward, the first and sort of most significant change is that each building will now make a prediction of how profitable it would be if it was able to add 1 week's worth of hires to its workforce, and avoid hiring if the prediction shows that they won't be able to maintain a minimum profit threshold. Now, that's important because what they used to do was just always try and hire as long as they weren't losing money. They say it's worth noting that buildings don't just stop hiring just because adding more employees would lower their minimum income per employee, but what this change does mean is that buildings won't hire themselves into unprofitability and the flow-on effects from that. They go on to say that the other sort of big one around employment logic is how buildings hire employees from each other. In the current version, buildings that aren't fully employed and who can't find anyone for their wages will hike their wages. This works okay, but it can produce some strange results across the board. To prevent it, the back and forth, non-standardized non-government buildings will now only consider hiring from another building if their productivity is not only higher than the target, but would also stay higher after hiring building gains 1 week's worth of new employees. So it's factoring in the future a little bit as well as what it's already got. The sensible goodness continues with some military line changes in what was actually the headlining change for this update, formation pathfinding. Formations no longer travel in straight lines, but along roads and sea lanes to reach their destinations. And you can visibly track their progress, of course, as they do, and as we've seen. Here, by the way, is what the old travel network looked like. Take note of the yellow lines across America, and now, bam! The new travel network. You can see many more lines. Obviously, most notably the red have been added, also some distinction between different types in the sea, so on and so forth. What they've done here is really tried to boost up and build on those effects that we already talked about in last time's video, in the update about seeing our formations on the map, which of course we've been witnessing. And also, I think another important note here is that if the travel network, which is what we're looking at and what we have been looking at here, isn't available to that unit for whatever reason, they can't access it, it's just not there, it's not within, then they will sort of go off-road, if you will. They're working on further UI changes so that we can visualize these armies. At the moment, they're horse and carts, I believe. Moving through to the next thing, kind of actually a selection of 4. Command limit, organization, supply, and morale. The command limit one, fairly simple, as they note. Commanders don't have their own personal military force anymore, but they still provide a command limit. The command limit of all commanders in formation is summed up to provide a command limit for the whole formation. If the number of units inside of it exceeds the limit, the formation will regain organization slower, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But this is a very important change. You'll see me faffing around, getting used to it, particularly in some of these later clips. Couple of noob moves. But the next thing, of course, that feeds into it, as I mentioned, is organization. When you first create a new formation, its organization is at 0. That org will build up over time to a cap, 25% as the minimum, and there'll be different things that will feed into this mechanic. Like the new mobilization options, for example, how long your troops have been mobilized and still, and of course there are penalties involved here as well, in proportion to the amount of organization you're missing below 100% of things like offense, defense, morale recovery, and more. Organization's not alone though. The third piece of this puzzle is supply. At the moment, supply formations works quite similarly to how it does for commanders. In future updates, they intend to impose a penalty for any input good shortages suffered by buildings that the supporting units need in that formation, and possibly some sort of fleet support capacity as well. Insufficient supply should have more of a direct impact on its own. And finally, completing our 4-piece puzzle, it's morale. In the current version, morale tracks towards the supply value such that units that belong to commanders with below par supply will gradually reduce their morale. In the new update to 1.5, morale is instead always regained when a unit is not in combat. But if morale is currently above the supply value, it will be regained much slower. And these have all kinds of implications, but the most sort of important thing they're trying to do is get us to manage things better, to be more tactical about how we do things, and to really give more meaning to fights and how you compose your armies. The military panels, as well, as you can see, have had a little bit of a facelift and a revamp to try and bring a little bit of extra life to them, make them a little bit more user-friendly, but also lean into those implications that I was talking about before, around organization and supply, for example, or insufficient command in your troopings, really having an impact on your morale and the overall success of your troops. Now, failure more likely for a mismanaged army would probably be the way I would put it, and a bit of a glow up around the UI. Moving through to orders and AI. On the topic of orders, there was an important note buried within, as you can see. It says that 2 of them, the standby and naval invasion orders, will be removed, and basically not a lot else will change. But in Update 2, coming in the future, and we'll talk about the future very soon, there'll be new orders added to commanders, alongside their sort of basic behavior like advancing a front, raiding convoys, etc., etc. Should be interesting. We don't have a lot of detail, but what we do have a lot of detail on right now is every single other little thing. Here you can see changes made to the AI, for example. Now taking into account factors when deciding how many construction sectors it should aim for, being less inclined to overspend on them, and less inclined to jump into diplomatic plays to gain new subjects, unless they are actually domineering towards those potential chumps. And a lot of the other things in the full patch notes are minor. They'll be linked below if you want to jump in. We've covered off all of the main things, basically, that they covered in the update. Let's talk about the future then. When can you play this? And the bigger things that are coming with Update 2. Well, you can play this from the week beginning September 18th. It'll roll out as part of the Steam Open Beta, so if you're playing through the Steam Open Beta, you'll get this straight away in a free download. Now, more importantly though, there's more to come. You see, the full update, including all of this, will roll out live to the general public, those plebs, in full sometime in November, with incremental updates between. Now, there are also a variety of other future changes that they've highlighted for an update in between now and then, such as naval warfare, conscription, battle conditions, and upgrading units. Conscription important because it's not actually really functioning in the beta build at the moment. Recruiting units for army formations as conscripts, raising them army by army, and lowering them alongside an army's demobilization will be coming back in Update 2. Some of the other big things around battle conditions and naval warfare as well include those additions of orders that we talked about before. The other categories, you're welcome to pause and read through them in great detail if you'd like them, include balancing, AI, the tutorials, which aren't very useful at the moment in the game anyway, and performance. Now, performance is something they're going to continue to work on and improve. Reduction in pop numbers and other things have made a good start, and in terms of balancing, all of these mechanics are going to be a priority for them in Update 2. Looking to not see certain metas emerge, try and sort of make things distinctly playable and give a bit of distinct flair to everything at the same time. Now, the beta build, as you will have noticed, is both a slight learning curve and also a little bit buggy, so do approach it with care. But I think overall, this update, the changes that we've talked about and seen in both 1.4, actually to its credit, and 1.5, have been quite positive for Victoria 3. The army feels a bit more real, a bit more impactful, more decisions, more characters. Thank you so much for joining me in today's video, everybody. Please leave a like on your way out if you enjoy this kind of Victoria 3 content, and I'll see you all next time.